Hi, I'm Shana Fannon, interior designer and advocate for connection, and this is Good by Design, a show about what defines us as individuals and how that influences what we create. And today we welcome Jen Groover. So, hey, Jen, how are you?
Good. I'm so happy to be joining you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show. So I read your book, The More Method. Our stories are similar enough that I just really relate to what you're talking about and how you've kind of worked through all of these, things in your life. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about who you are.
So my backstory is that I grew up, and my backstory that's relevant to that question is I grew up in a pretty dysfunctional home. My dad grew up very poor in a emotionally unintelligent family. And my mom grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and grew up in a very different family where her dad was like amazing and she was like best friends with him. And he was a local pharmacist. So back then that was like celebrity status in your Brooklyn neighborhood. And Vince Lombardi was actually her uncle. So it wasn't blood uncle, but it was like a family friend that was always around. So she had all these very strong male influences in her life. Mm-hmm. And she came to Philadelphia in the late 60s for a photo shoot. She was one of the first models for 17 magazine. Oh, wow. And when she came for the photo shoot, she had really kinky curly hair, and they tried to straighten her hair. Hair straightening just began at that time. So all of her hair fell out. So she was bald. And as she was bald, she met my dad, who was in the DA's office at the time. He was the attorney representing her. And they fell madly in love, whirlwind romance. And she fell in love with his strength. He was a Marine too. He was a tough guy. She fell in love with his strength, and he was the fun guy at that time. Well, quickly after getting married, she realized that she fell in love with a highly functioning alcoholic who became highly abusive once the honeymoon phase ended. So my mom, growing up the way she did, she was very strong too, which my dad was lured to as well, but became the battle between them, this battle of strength and egos. But my mom was scared of him and submissive of him, but she kept trying to change him back to that original vision he was in the beginning of the relationship. And as I'm saying that, I'm sure a ton of people can resonate with this phenomenon. So my mom minimized herself staying in the relationship, wound up having kids because she really wanted children. And the abuse didn't stop, it continued. So much of my childhood was witnessing the abuse, living through the abuse, sleeping in the back of station wagons when we'd escape in the middle of the night, or sleeping at a neighbor's house. So it was a very traumatic childhood. So when I went to college and I studied psychology, it resonated with me like, wow, all of my childhood is starting to make sense. My dad was only perpetuating the cycles of his childhood and the childhood before that. And the generations just kept repeating cycles and projecting the pain from one generation to the next. And I also realized my mom was staying in it, not because she didn't value herself, but she was, number one, a fixer. So she was trying to fix the situation. And she also was afraid because my dad controlled all of the money, all of the finances, and was very emotionally and mentally controlling of her as well. So she was afraid of it, as strong as she was. So she was staying in this relationship longer than she should have for fear of not having anything, number one, him abusing her by leaving, number two. And then more importantly, she was afraid of what would happen to us. So she stayed in it. As I'm saying this, I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with this too. So that set me on a path, when I was learning psychology in college and really identifying myself to never ever allow someone else to control my finances or my happiness. And I became obsessed with this study of human behavior. And I became obsessed with the reality that we all can become better versions of ourselves when we have the right tools. And so a lot of people do not great things, not because they're bad people, but because they had bad conditioning and they didn't have anyone giving them tools or guidance. So as I went on this journey of self-discovery in understanding psychology, and then I started my first business right out of college in the fitness industry. And it was such an incredible experience. I was traveling the world, teaching the world about fitness. This was in the mid and late 90s. And that was human potential too. That was all human behavior. Why do people overeat? Emotions, right? So I kept building on my information and my experiences. And then I wound up sitting at the feet of some of the greatest thought leaders in the world. And I would absorb every ounce of knowledge that they would have and enter those situations of teach me without ego. And I realized how much power we have in our minds and how much power we have in our ability to change every single moment we're experiencing by understanding the control of our minds. So I could live the same experience and you could live the same experience at the same moment, but our perceptions based on the ability to understand the control of our mind could be very different. Also, our perceptions could be different based on previous life experiences. But as I kept learning more and more about human behavior and applying it to my own life, I kept accelerating my life beyond what people that grew up around me were doing. And I was like, wow, there's really something to this. Everyone should know this. And that's me. Like the second I hear something, I'm like, I gotta tell everybody. I want everyone to know, like, why would you want to make your life harder when it doesn't need to be?
Yeah.
So one of the other big things in leading up to this book is I became very spiritual. And in my spirituality, I found components of healing too. So I already had the educational side of psychology and physiology and nutrition, and I kept building on that with neuroscience and quantum physics, metaphysics. But I really found clarity in how to explain it when I started studying Buddhism. And for those who don't know, isn't a religion as much as it really is a lifestyle of kindness, compassion, empathy, understanding, and putting into practice. Like it's one thing to think about being compassionate, totally different thing to be compassionate, especially when someone's hurting you or offending you or doing something wrong to you. So when I studied this and started to understand this, I was able to articulate all of these teachings that I had been having into a way that was practical, that other people could apply to their own lives. And so the Moore method actually was this culmination of my 20 plus years of studying and teaching human behavior and bringing all these disciplines together and my life experiences. All of these experiences gave me an opportunity to test these theories. And the biggest one being about self-responsibility. And at the end of the day, we are ultimately in charge no matter what is happening around us, to take responsibility for our lives and see every obstacle as an opportunity. When we do that, then we could thrive to very high levels and find fulfillment and happiness in the journey, because it's all a journey. There's no destination. And when we find fulfillment in the journey is when we find our inner peace and happiness.
Yeah. And I think that's what originally kind of drew me to you, because we met a few years ago and we just started chatting and I was like, oh my gosh, your story is so similar to my own. My dad did drink and my dad did drugs. Cocaine was his drug of preference. And so, you know, when I was little, and so we stayed at other people's houses. I distinctly remember like staying at my Aunt Kate's, but she wasn't actually blood. She just like took us in, you know, and kind of that kind of tumult that happens when you're living with somebody who has come from a cycle of abuse and who, you know, and then a mother who's trying to deal with it because she didn't grow up that way, you know, and so there's just so much that goes into that. And so I very much identified with your book and reading it. And I what I appreciate about it is there's so many personal development books out there. And what I appreciate is that yours came from a very specific personal story, you know, and many of them, people do a lot of research, they'll take other people's stories, which is also very powerful. But what I think makes your book, The Moore Method, even more powerful is that it's your story. And so you kind of walk us through like what happened in your life and also what you've researched in other people's lives, and then how we can apply these these methods to our life. And I loved the journaling aspect. There's other books that I have read that, they ask you to journal, but they're quite long, and then they ask you to journal. And so at some point in time, you kind of lose interest in either journaling, or you're like, okay, I'm going to have to put this book aside until I can actually journal. What I appreciate is that you had this commitment to making it something that was digestible in a pretty quick period of time. And by incorporating the journaling, it just kind of like solidifies all these methods that you talk about, which I think is great. I read the book in just about a day, in like a 24-hour period, with having everything else that I had going on, which I think is pretty incredible considering, everybody has all these busy lives. When you want to change your life, sometimes when it's really easy and accessible and easy to apply, that's really what actually, that's what actually makes us be able to apply it to our lives and have it be helpful.
And that was my point. I mean, I love reading, but I'm also ADD, and there's so many books that I'll start and I'll feel like they're overburdening or overwhelming to me. Not that I'm not enjoying them, but the approach to it just feels so long and arduous. And so when I was writing the book, I wanted to feel like it was almost, in each chapter was like a module, and it was short and sweet, but packed with information and inspiration. And
I love this, Jen. I really hope that people pick up your book and read it, and will, connect with you and tell you, be able to share their own stories about the book. What is the best way for people to get in touch with you, Jen?
Through social media. It's my name, Jen Groover, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm most active on Facebook and Instagram, also LinkedIn too.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much, Jen. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's a lot of fun.